Hi, this is the first of 3 videos we're going to have on forms. In this video, I'm going to give you some general tips, I'm going to show you some free sources, and I'm going to get you started finding out how to find forms or sample agreements on Bloomberg Law. So here's some general tips for you. First, there are some free Mass forms available on the mass.gov site, so we're going to take a look at those. My next tip is that the large forms databases that were mentioned in the Cali exercises, I just want to mention to you that they may not contain all the forms you have available to you on those research platforms. One example I can think of is the MCLE publications often have really helpful forms that aren't available in those large forms databases. My third tip is that if you can find a form with annotations or associated practice tips, that might be where you want to start for more complicated drafting assignments. Say you're asked to draft a complaint in a employment law action, or you have to draft a complicated executive employment agreement with lots of provisions. If you're not familiar with drafting this type of pleading or agreement, these more these sources that have annotations or practice tips will help you understand why various provisions have been included. My final tip is similar to what we talked about with secondary sources. Just like secondary sources are a great place to start research when looking at legal issues, forms can be a great place for starting your drafting, but you always have to adapt it to fit your client's own needs. So the first place that I want to look for free sources is our own Moakley Law Library webpage, and I'm on the research page. From there you want to click into Guides and Treatises, and I picked the Massachusetts Legal Research Guide. You might see here that there are a lot of topics that could help with this class, but for this week we're going to look at Massachusetts Legal Forms, which is the first tab. There we have listed alphabetically a whole bunch of different areas of law, and I've picked civil procedure just to show you. And what you'll see here is you get entries not for forms themselves, but for publications, Massachusetts publications in particular, that have helpful forms included in the set. For example, this first one, the Massachusetts Basic Practice Manual, is an MCLE publication that includes forms. The mass.gov site is also a great place to go for simple forms. There are 2 different places where they have forms. One that has what they call legal forms, which they describe as forms that you don't usually file in court, like for taxes, sales, powers of attorney, or healthcare proxies. And for those types of forms, you're going to be under the Case and Legal Resources tab in the Massachusetts Court System page on mass.gov. This is similar to what Rick showed you when we were looking at the Massachusetts laws about provided by the Mass Trial Court Law Libraries. So, and this is the breadcrumb trail at the top. One good way to find these is to just Google Massachusetts legal forms, and for me, these MassGov pages came right to the top of my search results. So here you can see I've just cut off it a little bit, but you can get a sense of the types of forms that might be available here. For example, simple name changes or forms that have to do with grandparents' visitation. The other link that we're going to look at are the court forms, and that is in the Massachusetts court systems just under this Forms tab. And you can see that we can get forms that are listed by topic, by court, or by key. We can search by keyword. I've just looked under topic. There aren't too many to sift through, and I picked bar applicants. You can see here when we click into list forms, there are 3 forms listed. And I wanted you to get a sense of what one of these simple forms look like, so I picked the Massachusetts Student Practitioner form. Maybe some of you are familiar with this form. But it's the form that a student would fill out to request permission to practice in front of the Massachusetts courts. And in this case, this is a fairly simple form. It's a PDF that you can actually fill the fields in and then print. I did want to point out, though, that there are a few footnotes at the bottom that give further explanation of the underlying law, in this case, SJC Rule 303. So these are the kind of features you're going to be looking at when you do your assignment for this week. You want to look at how simple is the form and what are the features for ease of use, like can I easily fill it in, can I easily adapt it if I need to, Can I print it? Can I save it? Are there helpful footnotes? Are there helpful annotations or practice guidance? Let's talk a little bit about forms on Bloomberg Law. What I'm going to show you is one good place to get started if you're not used to using probably many of the Bloomberg Law features, but particularly helpful for forms and other practice type materials. I'm going to talk a little bit about transactional resources, including the Dealmaker Documents Library on Bloomberg Law, and I want you also to watch a video which has more detail on those resources. For litigation resources, I am going to show you a getting started page and a place where you can get a few sample documents, but I think the best resource, or one of the best resources on Bloomberg Law for sample documents, are going to be underlying filings that we can have access to through the dockets research that we can do on Bloomberg Law. So we're going to talk about that in a little more detail when we do the segments on docket research this week. Finally, I want to remind you about the secondary sources we have available on Bloomberg Law, including the BNA publications, and particularly for Massachusetts research, the MCLE publications. These larger sets geared towards practitioners often have helpful forms and things like checklists that you can use when you're doing drafting assignments or working through an assignment given to you by a supervising attorney. Okay, so when you're getting started on Bloomberg Law, on your home page or your landing page, if you scroll down a little bit, under Law School Success, there's actually quite a lot of helpful resources here, but what we're going to look at today are the practice-ready resources. When you click into that, what you get are resources that have been organized by practice area, by litigation, and by transactional. And you can see that we're getting some videos and some research guides, in addition to a few sample documents. And the same for transactional research. You're getting a skills guide, some videos, a few sample agreements, and then overviews of different types of agreements that are commonly used, and also overviews of boilerplate clauses that are commonly used in transactional practice. So this can be a really good place to start when you're starting out a litigation assignment or a transactional research assignment and using the resources on Bloomberg Law. Quickly, I just wanted to mention the Dealmaker document database, which you'll go into more detail in the separate Bloomberg Law video. When we're on Bloomberg Law, there's often more than one way to get to the same material, but we're often using these tabs across the top. In this case, you're going to want to use the Transactional Law tab, and underneath that, the Dealmaker document link to get to this database on Bloomberg Law. Last week, Rick mentioned the BNA practice centers. This is another way that you could get to sample agreements and forms on Bloomberg Law. I just picked the Corporate and M&A Practice Center to show you how you would get into these materials. Instead of picking books and treatises like we did for secondary source materials, I picked transactional resources, which gives me a list of transactional type material in the field of corporate and M&A practice. For example, I can search for documents using the Dealmaker document search, and there's also some materials here. There's more that I didn't show you, but for example, some governing documents, some preset searches that I could use to find examples of certificates of incorporation, for example. My final tip on Bloomberg Law is I want you to remember that there's often forms available in treatises and practice materials. Last week, Rick showed you how to use, from the Getting Started box, the link to books and treatises to get to these treatise materials on Bloomberg Law. Just so you have another way to get into materials, I'm going to show you how to get in using the Search and Browse feature. So when you're searching for secondary sources, this is another option that you can use. You can click Search and Browse, All Legal Content, and then when you're in there, you can pick by content type, jurisdiction, or practice area. Just to give you an idea of what's available in Massachusetts, I scrolled all the way down to M, and I opened up the little X box where Massachusetts was, and you can see I'm getting a lot of different material. At the bottom, I have Mass Secondary Sources, which I clicked on. Once I click on that link, it appears at the bottom, and I've added it to my search. So that way, when I put my search in the keyword search box, I know I'm searching all mass secondary sources. So here it is again, all mass secondary sources. Those are the sources I'm searching. And then using my search help, I created this really quick search. So I'm looking for an MCAD complaint, so Mass Commission Against Discrimination complaint. And I put those in quotation marks, so that'll be a phrase. And I'm also looking, I want a form of that. So I don't want just a discussion about it, I want a form. I could have probably also added or exhibit, because a lot of these secondary sources talk about having them as an exhibit or an appendix to the document. I know from looking at my search help that a space in Bloomberg Law is an and. So I'm all set to go, and I can click search. And what I get as a result are 16 results, which are primarily MCLE. I think they're actually all MCLE publications. And this one is having to do with landlord-tenant practice in Massachusetts. And I'm in Chapter 4 in this result, and it's about discrimination issues in housing. So if I clicked into that, what I get is Chapter 4, which gives me discussion about these issues in Massachusetts law. But I can also see that as an exhibit to Chapter 4, Exhibit 4C has an MCAD complaint form that I could use if I needed to draft this type of complaint if I was practicing before this administrative agency in Massachusetts. Finally, I just wanted to remind you about the help button that Rick pointed out to you last week. So if you need more help creating searches or understanding databases on Bloomberg Law, this is another great place to go. So this again is the first video for forms. You'll have another one on tips on Westlaw, Lexis Advance, Lexis Practice Advisor. And the final is just a short video prepared by the team at Bloomberg Law on transactional resources, which mostly includes sample agreements and forms.